Prabala-Joslin, and yeah, you're a writer and a poet, and you write about your childhood memories and the fluidity of thoughts and everything, and you have also plurality a lot in your texts. Yeah, and today we are just gonna talk about a little bit this. And yesterday you had also a really impressive reading with, yeah, which also kind of showed really in a picture what you mean with fluidity, because you had those waves and the sounds of this. It was really kind of meditative also and really interesting. I think we're going to talk about it later too. And while we were talking, we wanted to do a mosaic, yeah, just for fun. So we have like these little stones that we can arrange here. Yeah, and at the end we are probably going to have a beautiful mosaic, hopefully. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. How was your first day at the festival yesterday?
Thank you for having me here. How was the festival? I think yesterday was, it was many firsts for me as a writer, which I really enjoyed, because they basically said like, okay, you have this slot. The first slot was a solo format. And I had about they'd given me 1 hour, 45 minutes for my slot, and it was just me. Usually I tend to read with other poets, or there's a very specific format of how you do spoken word, right? There's many people following you, etc. And I think this helped me break out of that format and also think about what does a poet do when given so much time, because there's also only so much you can read, right? So what I really liked about my solo format event was that firstly the topic was about madness, which I'd been wanting to write about a long time, and also not write in a very direct way. So I had a major part of the performance or the reading was from my own journals. So I wanted to just pick out random sentences from journals from the last 5 years. So it also was a very interesting way of thinking about what is considered writing for someone else to read, right? Because a journal is something that you don't really share. It's never meant to be read out loud, right? Yeah, so it was a very intimate experience. People were very close. I also didn't know how to negotiate that because it was the first time for me. And the second event, of course, we had, you mentioned, we had the waves. We had 3 languages, and I was also doing it with Sinthujan. So there were many new experiences as such there, I think. And of course, to be at festivals, I think literary festivals are places where you get so many new ideas and also meet new people. The atmosphere of this festival is very cozy, I think. Also being in a school building after a long time, performing in a space called the Klassenzimmer. Yeah, it's very endearing, I have to say.
Yeah, you just said that you're used to performing or presenting your text with others, so not alone. You're not used to that. How did this develop? That you're doing this with other people?
I think it's. I would like to consider that it has a very organic way of flowing. I think the event I did with Sinthujan yesterday, kadal, ondru. I think it happened somehow because of how we think, certain stories that were shared between us, and also I think both of us are very interested in oceans or the sea. There's a romantic attachment that comes very deeply and naturally, which I could tell already somehow. Yeah. For me, collaboration, I think, writing together needs some amount of practice, and also you are somehow editing each other, right? Or seeing how you could flow into another person's text, or how you could come together without negating any aspects of each of their works, right? So what I really liked about this collaboration was that even though the texts happened very individually, it just fit in and complemented each other so well. And as I was reading, I could feel like also with the waves, and then like the words mixing, the emotion was changing for me as well as I was listening. And I was telling like I would love to like do it a bit longer, because I think the melody also flows into the word and how I read. So I would like to like be more immersed in that feeling for longer and see how the tone changes.
Do you have a question?
Yes, in advance before our talk, we ask you to bring a piece of art or a piece of decor from your fridge at home.
Yeah.
Maybe you can show us what you brought and why.
I brought this thing. It's like a, collage or something that my sister made me in 2016 when I was just going to come to Germany. So it has a map of the southern part of India, and she has marked my hometown, and she's made like these dotted lines, and there's a butterfly which is flying away, and here on top it says, "Let your dreams take flight." And I have this, like on the back side there's like wishes from my mom, my dad, and my niece. So I don't know, it's something that I keep alongside me. And I think it also reflects so many aspects of this notion of somebody who's leaving home and going somewhere else. And in this card, I see the support of my family, which has somehow always been unwavering, especially towards my writing. And I think it motivates me as well. Like, for example, my sister has written here, it says, "Have fun and be good." Yeah, my mom has said, "God bless you, loving Amma." And my dad has said, "Your loving father." So yeah, it's just a piece of the family that's always there, I guess, yeah.
And do you always keep it with you because you move a lot? Like you lived in many countries, and how can you adapt to all those countries? Does it help that you get the support, or?
That's a very detailed question. Of course, it helps a lot to have a notion of support. And I think, of course, there's a gap between what each individual understands as to what support is. And I think there is definitely a gap between what parents imagine as support and what a person from another generation would expect as support. So I think each party does their own best, right? Or what they understand the best of what they want to give. Adapting to different countries, I have to be very honest, it's a very unconscious process, like especially like in Germany, when I arrived in Germany and my life here in Germany, I've definitely been more of an adult who was making conscious choices. But I think this still keeps evolving, right? Like, so when I was living in Romania, for example, I did not have this sense of, like a strong sense of self, for example, or what do I need to be the most comfortable self or to feel at home. So it was more rather just going with the flow. And I think still there is this tendency to just go with the flow and just let things happen. And I don't know if I would call that, I don't know, adapting or something. Now in my, I don't know, in myself, do have this, like, I do have many questions about integration. How do I see myself as this person located in a specific place which is not technically home, where the language doesn't feel the same? What am I losing? What am I gaining? Things like that, yeah. Sorry, this is
You were just starting to talk about language. You also write in 3 different languages, in German, in English, and in Tamil. what does that bring to your writing? How do you express yourself in different languages, and are there different qualities to each language?
I have to be very honest, I write in English and Tamil. German very rarely, mainly because I mean with English and Tamil, they are my languages, you know, and I feel very much at home with them, and also there's an emotional evolution with it which has happened in a very different way. With German, definitely I don't feel that confidence because I cannot really tell if something is as poetic as I think it is, or what does this sentence actually do, merely because I don't have that type of experience and exposure to the language or frequency. Like I read more in English, sometimes in Tamil, so all that contributes a lot. But between English and Tamil, I find the differences really fascinating. Of course, coming from a place where, due to social, historical, political reasons, English as this language has been prioritized in many ways. So obviously my English is definitely much more better than my Tamil, which is something I actively try to correct. In Tamil, the emotion is very raw. Like I also feel that it's a little bit like a possession. The voice takes over and the voice does what it wants to do. It does the speaking. I do think I'm more of a channel there, because there are sometimes I use words which I would not use normally, or I haven't thought about it, or I would like look up the word much later and be like, wow, this actually fits so perfectly. I did not know this is what I wanted to express. So I consider it a very sacred connection somehow, because it comes from a very long time ago. It feels like many people's voices. There's a communal element to it, which definitely feels very different when I'm writing in English, where the voice is very much individualized. It's me, I am speaking. So certain types of hegemonies are relieved when I write in Tamil, where I feel I'm also devoid of many of these identity markers. It's just me. It's a little bit like the sea, I think, the waves. The language just flows much more easily.
Yeah. Yes. Yesterday, I also totally had a feeling of like that. It is music what you were reading in the different languages. Does rhythm? What does the rhythm play a role for you when you write in those different languages?
Yesterday I was trying to match the rhythm of all three languages, to stress in a similar way, to make this like I really wanted all three languages to just flow into each other and to just like have that rhythm, right? But yes, in general, like I think a lot about, like I think this is also the thing, like I was, though currently I'm not very musical, but growing up, we used to sing a lot of songs, like listen to a lot of things. Orality, like there is a very natural rhythm to this, which is preserved from childhood, especially I think, which I tend to repeat a lot. So I listen to a lot of like older Tamil songs, or songs that are close to my mom that she listens to, just to replicate a specific type of atmosphere. And then I listen. I think this was one of the major changes that happened for me with poetry, that it changed from writing poetry to listening for poetry, or listening for the words, and then hearing the words and then writing it. And when you're hearing, I think automatically the rhythm plays a role. Yeah, and of course, like, I mean, to me, research for a poem would be just to think for myself, like, what type of pace do I want to establish? For example, once I was writing about nightmares, and one of the things that I really wanted to do was to to give that tension. So how do you create that tension, especially when you are telling a narrative prose poem, right? Yeah, so it also depends on the content and how you want this content to bleed into the rhythm so that you give that intensity to the listeners, right? Yeah, I'm still learning so much about rhythm, actually. It's very exciting.
In your performance yesterday, you always read 1 or 2 lines of the poem and then the exact 2 lines in another language. So you translated it almost directly. Do you work with translation regularly, and what does translating literature mean to you?
Oh, no, I'm not a translator. I don't think so. So this was, Kadal Ondru was definitely one of the first text where I thought about translation in that way. Or, I mean, I did not think about translation. I thought about having these 3 languages together, right? Which was also one of the reasons why I opted for these shorter sentences, because then I felt a little bit more confident to speak that in German, right? Because, yeah, just for the confidence of it. I don't see it as translations. I do think there were a few changes, like maybe professional translators wouldn't have translated in that way. But I don't want to actually replicate the exact sentence. For me, what is more interesting is if a person who speaks Tamil, German, and English is present and listening to this, what type of experience do they get? Does this, even if it's just one person in the room, like what experience does this person get? And of course, like if a person only speaks English, then what experience do they get from this, like in an auditory way? Because I think ultimately, like this is my personal idea that like words can transmit the emotion, but it is rather the pace that really defines what somebody understands of it. So I usually focus a little bit more on intonating and seeing what my voice does with the words to carry that emotion further, rather than the accuracy of the translation as such. But this is, what I would do is like probably I would take this text to a few other people and also get to know some impressions and then see what it needs. Yeah.
Yeah, yesterday I said to Paula that I think it would have been so interesting if I didn't understand any of those languages, because I think that would be also, because I think you can totally separate that it's different languages, but yeah, you said what's the difference between if you can understand everything, if you can understand just one language, and I think it's also interesting if you don't understand any of them. And you said that intonation, everything is really important to you. I mean, I don't want to ask if it's more important to you than the content, but what is like this intonation, like something what is really important for you?
I think, I don't think you can say one is more important than the other, for sure. I think it's like everything sort of tends to come together. Pacing and intonation helps me as a writer, I think, which is why like I approach it in that way, and also thinking about like my strengths. So I tend to focus on it when I write, and this is a fixed for me no matter what I write, like prose or poetry, because I think this intonation and pace is unique to every writer or poet, and pressing on like the strengths that I know of myself, of my own writing, I think it just lets the story or the text evolve in a different way. But of course, like content also has a major importance. Like the way content evolves is also very interesting, right? Like sometimes maybe it's just like one small sentence that somebody would have said, and then it just blows up into layers and layers of thought. But yeah, they go very much hand in hand. Like I mentioned about this nightmare text, I cannot imagine using that type of voice, that type of intention, and that suspension, talking about the sea, for example. Like to me, to talk about the sea, no matter whether we are talking about the atrocities or the lives lost, or just a beautiful moment of being by the seaside, I think the landscape dominates it in a way where I listen to the landscape. Yeah.
Speaking of content, you also do research about feminist memory culture. Can you explain what that means and what you do?
I have to be very honest. I recently just stepped out of academia, and my orientations are not very much. I mean, these are no longer my research interests, I would say. I was a pseudo-academic, I would say, who was in the space and sort of looking at many things. And yes, for the last 5-6 years, I did a lot of work to do with like feminist media and memory culture, especially like with memory culture in specific to this very German understanding of cultural memory. What does that mean? And also like moving away from this very specific, very German ethnographic way of doing memory, because the roots of this notion of cultural memory, it comes from really horrible anthropological studies. And I was very interested in counteracting this, also understanding for myself as a writer what language comprises of, or what am I doing when I write something, especially in terms of like what is being talked about, what is being preserved, like what perspective am I giving, right? So I did do very many, like for example, one of the main research works I was doing was on data science, and this was at that point, like 5-6 years ago, was when many people, many researchers around the world were questioning data supremacy and also critiquing the horrors of it. So I did do a lot about like feminist data science and things like that. But what, to be very honest, like I realized in the last few years in academia that I am not an academic, that the language evades me somehow. Yeah, so it also helped me to move, like, to tell myself, like, I do want to make to put out political thoughts. Writing literature somehow automatically lends to political thought. But for me to write a poem or a story and send it out into the world, it has much more reach, or it touches people in a different way than if I would write an academic article, you know, because I feel there's a distance. Yeah. So
it is really important for you to reach as many people as you can, or what would you say about that? Because you know, plurality and fluidity is like something what your writing is about, or the way you write. And yeah, do you have like people you want to reach, or is it mainly for you to express your feelings or your memories?
I mean, I definitely write to be read. I would like to be read, for sure. I think this also helps me locate myself in a very, I mean, the literature industry, we were talking a lot about this yesterday. Ultimately, it is an industry, and as much as I would like to make a career, an independent career out of writing, I feel that it puts a lot of pressure on me as a writer in this industry. So I don't think I write for the money. Of course, money plays a very important role. But when I have these core intentions, I think it affects the writing quite drastically. So I had to really ask myself, like, why are you working so hard? What is the intention? And to be read, I think to be heard and to be read is definitely a very core desire, because of course I can keep a text to myself, but the text has to go out into the world in some form and take its own life, and I want to see it take its life, and it can happen with a reader or a listener. So I don't think I've been read widely. I've had a couple of pieces which have reached more people than I expected, and one of the stories, what really touched me was, like, I was writing about personal memory, fictionalized personal memory from childhood, and it was set in my school back home, and I was just amazed at how many people reached out to me, especially women who reached out and who said, like, wow, this takes me right back, this is exactly what it was, thank you for putting it in words. Things like that. Like, I think that really, really appealed to me, especially, like, I also had childhood friends who read it and who reached out, and they were like, wow, this is us, this was us under the tree. So those emotions, I feel, that type of response really means a lot to me, for sure. Yeah.
And before, you said that listening is important for you when we talked about rhythm, that listening is important so that you can achieve that in your writing. But what when you talk about speaking, because yesterday we heard it, and I think this absolutely makes it more accessible for others, because I wouldn't be able to read Tamil, but I heard it and it made something with me. And what would you say is the difference between that?
Between me listening and me reading, you mean?
Yeah, and maybe also between the words which would be on paper. So between all
yes,
that.
I definitely write very differently for reading and for publication. The focus differs quite a bit, right? Like, because when you have a text that you want to read, you as a reader, you define the type of attention you give to the text. Like, you could be a reader who maybe reads a sentence so many times, underlines, goes into the meanings of the words. So I think the reader is at a very different independence to negotiate the text. But when I read out the text, I seek out clarity a lot, because I can imagine that, especially in an audience, there will be people with, like, different types of language comprehensions, literary comprehensions, and I think striving for clarity, because I want people to be able to understand. Like, I do not want to give this notion of, oh wow, this writer spoke something really complex and very, very floral and pompous language or whatever. No comment on anybody. But personally, what I felt was, like, I want this clarity. I want people to be able to hear that it's a very simple sentence, but this sentence has a lot to say. And that is something I aim for when I'm reading. But whereas when I'm writing a text to be read, then there I sort of go free, because then I can construct as many layers as I want, make as many metaphors as I want, because the format lends to that type of attention, Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Do you have a question?
Yes. Do you want to be? Do you want to create, like, collectivity with your writing? You were talking about writing in Tamil and being part of history with that. We talked about collaborative writing before, and about spoken word. It's also very much about having a connection. You have a much more direct connection when you read a text to someone than when they just read it at home. Is collectivity or being part of collective important for you?
For sure, yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, like even the simple notion of like, I want to be read, there is a collective there, and I mean, language already comprises a collective. I think in terms of content, I would definitely think a lot about like, how would somebody say this, like, or how would like I say this back home, like what type of union do we want this text to express? Am I using we, like am I speaking as an individual, or who am I speaking for? So I think it is, I mean, really hard to be distant from this for me, because the collective also gives the stories. I think like for me to be a poet or a writer is somehow also being a wanderer, somehow just going around, listening to things, listening to what people say, and yeah, gathering some sort of like it is a collective mosaic, for example, like each story, each text. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Yeah, we're done. Thank you for being here. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.